Thank you very much, Mark. Assalamu alaikum, sabah khair. Thank you very much, Dr. Al-Qahtani, for having us this morning. It's a pleasure to speak with all of you, and very much an honor to be here at SAU's first IT Day. So again, my name is Sean McCurdy. I'm with Cisco Systems, and although I am in sales, I have a background both as an educator and in education, so I'm very passionate about this subject, and I'm hoping to leverage some of the great framework that Mark started with to talk about where education is going. After the presentation, if you have any questions, I'd be more than happy to answer them. Unfortunately, we are fairly limited on time, so I will present some very brief concepts, and hopefully we'll have an opportunity for more discussion afterwards. So Mark talked about the 3 IT platforms, but he also mentioned something very important, that we started in an analog world in education. So I'm going to talk about the history from there through what I would call the 4th platform, which is the Internet of Everything. As Mark mentioned, some of you may not remember mainframes, but I think everyone can remember that education 20, 30 years ago was predominantly conducted, not with whiteboards, but with chalk on a slate. And in many institutions, we've replaced the chalk on a slate with a digital whiteboard, right? But we haven't advanced the pedagogy in the classroom beyond the simple one-way, one-directional communication from teacher to student. It's a pleasure to see that SAU is adopting next-generation technologies, and with the IT and distance learning deanship, you're taking your interaction with students to the next level, but many institutions haven't reached that point yet. And if we look, as Mark mentioned, at the 3 platforms, if we rewind about 7 years ago, all of us started to see that devices started to show up in the classroom. We'd call that the Internet of Things at Cisco, right? I left my PDA in my bag so that it didn't cause a problem with the microphone, of course. But I think if you look in your pockets, you'll probably find a BlackBerry, maybe an iPhone. There's probably an iPad in one of your briefcase pockets as well, right? We have this proliferation of devices. And as educators and as IT professionals, we have to figure out what to do with that in the classroom. And Mark mentioned it very well. We have to decide the balance between access and productivity, between security of our intellectual property in a university environment and openness for collaboration. That's the current IT challenge. But I want to challenge you with this conversation, take it one step further. What's next? Cisco calls the next step the Internet of Everything. And we have a paper at our booth that talks about it in more detail and talks about Cisco's perspective. But in summary, we think we're going beyond just the data that we see with the Internet of Things to an ecosystem that encompasses people, processes, data, and things. An all-encompassing ecosystem. What does that mean? Today, it's Cisco's perspective that 99% of the devices that will be connected in 10 years are not connected today. Think about that. This may seem like a really strange example to have a cow on a slide about the Internet of Things. But just down the road at the Badia farm, as part of Al Marai, they've put an RFID tag on every one of the 20,000 cows that's out in the fields. A friend of mine in Riyadh is actually their head veterinarian, and we had a tour of the farm not too long ago. And every one of those cows is tracked at least 100 times a day. And you think about that in terms of the curriculum you have here at SAU in the College of Engineering and Computer Science around enterprise resource planning. If you look at the types of solutions you're teaching your students to code to, right? The types of programs you're developing, they're dealing with whole different data sets now than we used to deal with 10 and 15 years ago. And if you couldn't tell, my background is actually in database administration and database programming. So, the types of challenges I was writing code to 20 years ago as e-commerce first started are very different than the challenges that are faced by your students that are learning to write code today for the next generation of applications. And part of the responsibility of universities like SAU is to embrace those next set of applications and figure out how we arm students with the knowledge to address those challenges. It's also about people. Again, we mentioned the balance between access and security, One of the other things that we have to acknowledge is that more people are being connected every day than were connected 20 years ago from a data perspective. And so we have to understand how that ubiquitous access translates into new problem sets and new applications that we write so that we provide security pervasively across our infrastructure, both from an academic perspective and as you deliver end products to your customers, whether that's inside of the university or to universities' partners. So what does that look like? You know, many of you will know from a technology background, about 3 years ago, we ran out of IPv4 addresses. Now, for people that don't have a deep technology background, if you're from the School of Medicine or elsewhere, you know, that may sound weird, but you know, if I think all of us have a home router where we've had to, you know, hit 192.168.100.1, right, or some such 4-digit number. Those numbers are now 128 bits long with IPv6, right? We have millions and millions of devices connected now. We will have billions and billions connected in the future. And in fact, according to Cisco's internal data, and with partners like IDC, the analysis shows us that 2 years ago, we crossed the threshold where there are now more connected devices on the planet than there are people, right? There are roughly 7.5 billion people. As of 2011, we believe there are roughly 10 billion connected devices. So again, back to the problem sets that SAU has to train students to solve. They're no longer connecting tens of devices. You're connecting millions of devices. It's no longer about a client server. It's about a server that could be accessible by billions of people. And understanding what that means for your security architecture and for the problems that you need to teach students to address. And if we look 10 years out, at this rate, 50 billion things will be connected. Again, that may sound far-fetched, but if we go back to the example of the cows at Al Murai, if we've already got 10,000 cows connected, you can only imagine what's next. You know, back to Mark's example of cars. You know, on the way down from Riyadh this morning, there was a traffic jam just where South Ring Road and Kharj Road connect, right? If my car was connected, I would have known that. I could have driven around it. Those are the types of coding challenges that we're going to be equipping students to answer for industry partners and for future applications for end users. The Wall Street Journal had a fabulous article just a few weeks ago this month talking about this and what it means for the classroom. And I'd like to cite just a few examples here. Dr. Al-Qahtani, you did a wonderful job of describing the e-learning environment that you're building, and you're already talking to where things will be in the next 5 years, right? Institutions are no longer places where students go. They're a hub for information and capability. In my home state of Colorado in the United States, one of the local universities, the University of Colorado at Colorado Springs, has done something similar to what SAU is doing. They've become a hub for 25 regional institutions that have between 5 students and 5,000 students. They're connecting grade schools and high schools and the university environment to create science, technology, engineering, and math learners from the very beginning, from very young age, as they start to play with apps on their iPads, all the way up through PhD students. And that's the challenge now, is institutions are becoming a cross-functional hub, and you as educators have to figure out, again, how to protect your intellectual property in that environment, but also how to reach out to the community and leverage the best of that scale. That's going to be a major challenge for the next 10 years. Textbooks are no longer a massive stack that we carry with us. I mentioned I'm a bit of a nerd, right? I'm working on refreshing my C++ right now so that I can help my son with a school project at the American School in Riyadh. I'm not looking for anything that's in a textbook form because any textbook that's at Jarir is already out of date, right? I'm looking for things as a continuing learner that are digital. Your students today are looking for that same environment. And as we look 10 years out, a syllabus will be a collection of references to electronic materials, not a stack that someone has to spend $10,000 on, right, in a year for their education. And importantly, calendaring in the classroom, and I think Dr. Al-Qahtani, you touched on it, the ability to be flexible about location and time is critically important. I'll go back to the example of being stuck in traffic this morning. You know, if I as a student was coming from Riyadh, or if I'm coming from the south or the east or the west, and we all know that traffic here in Saudi can be unpredictable, right? All it takes is one truck to have a wreck, and you know, with no way around it, and you're stuck unless you have a 4x4 and you drive through the desert, right? With a mobile device, students can now either capture a recorded lecture and download that, or they can participate remotely. As we look 10 years from now, students aren't going to see that as an exception. They're going to see that as the basic expectation. And it's up to universities like SAU to pioneer how you embed that in your offering of a course, so that it's no longer about finishing a bachelor's degree in 2 or 4 years. It's about providing the courses that are relevant to a student when they want to take them, and assembling those into a meaningful degree program that allows them to matriculate out into industry and fulfill the role that they want to acquire, whether that's in programming, or that's in systems administration, or that's in medicine. So in summary, the current state of education is in flux. But if we look 10 years from now, I think it's going to be even more dynamic. It's going to be a cloud-based infrastructure where universities provide the hub for education and provide the accreditation of completion, but won't necessarily provide the physical infrastructure. Obviously, you know, you still need to congregate. You know, people still want to interact with people, but the way that teaching happens is going to continue to change. So I'll conclude by saying the Internet of Everything is going to be a dynamic piece of the evolution of the classroom environment. We're going to see data from problem sets, again, like the cows down the road at Al Marai, in the classroom, part of the classroom, and part of project-based learning. And it's up to institutions like SAU to lead for the next 10 years and build a set of solutions that allow your students to be an active set of participants in the next generation of jobs. Thank you very much for your time, and I look forward to speaking with you during the panel.